Welcome, Buff fans. I'm Brian Howell, and joined by Matt Smith once again. And Matt, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. We're going to wrap up spring football, and we're going to do more of these in the off season because there's always plenty of stuff to talk about. But we're going to talk about the spring game and jersey retirement and transfer portal, all that stuff. But how was your weekend?
My weekend was fine. Was fine. It was pretty low key,
Yeah,
after Saturday, getting the Buffs out of the way and then getting going with Nuggets and Avs in the playoffs. This is one of my favorite times of the year.
yeah,
I absolutely love it. It's just unfortunate for us this year. We drew the short straw, so the Nuggets and the Avs play on almost like the same day. I think it's for 5 different games of their first
Mhm.
round series respectively, which sucks because
Yeah,
tonight the Avs are 7:30, Nuggets are 8. You got to watch them simultaneously, which is a
yeah.
bummer when it comes
Right.
to playoff games. But no, it's I'm doing all right.
Was it
I mean,
was it last year or the year before where it was like
it was last
literally
year.
every day there was like Nuggets one day, Avs the next day, Nuggets one day. Was it last year?
It was last year.
Was it
It was
last year?
like
Yeah,
20 straight days of playoff games.
yeah,
It was dopamine overload, but
yeah.
it was fantastic. And I'm kind of, I'm fiending for it a little bit. Like last night I was like, yeah, okay, I've got 3 great shows to watch. I watch The Last of Us, Mobland, and Righteous Gemstones, which is all Sunday night. I was like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
great, but I would have really liked, an Avs playoff game tonight or a Nuggets playoff game tonight. But,
Right. Yeah.
beggars can't be choosers. I'm doing all right. How you doing? How was your
I'm
weekend?
good. Well, hey, I mean, and both of them won game one on Saturday. And, I was
Yeah.
walking up to the press conference and Brett Bartolone, the tight ends coach, was walking down and gave me a fist bump. He says, good win today. And I said, yeah, nice job. You guys didn't lose today. So the Buffs didn't lose either. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm good. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just, it's just that time of year, busy with family stuff. And, spring ball is over, but there's gonna be a lot of draft stuff this week. And so we got to get through the NFL draft and, you know, yeah, we haven't talked about this, but maybe we won't have time today, but we ought to maybe in a couple of days do a draft preview show.
I was just thinking I've just been so focused on spring ball and what's
Yeah.
going on right here that you just kind of sparked that idea in my head. Well,
Let's just make
if
the
not
idea
this
right
week,
here. Yeah.
okay, yeah, if not this week, we definitely got to do
Yeah.
a review show, but
Yeah,
I'm open for
definitely.
a preview show. I mean,
Yeah.
drafts on Thursday, right? So,
Let's do it. Let's do it. So
okay.
I know that people want it.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
but
Yeah.
let's start with before we really get into our observations from the spring game. Let's just address a topic that was hot last week that we're just going to kind of put to bed now. But like the whole jersey retirement thing,
Mhm.
and obviously it was a very polarizing thing, with CU retiring the jerseys of Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders on Saturday. Cool ceremony and cool honor for both those guys. I will say that, regardless of, and I tweeted this out the other day or X'd it out, whatever. Regardless of how you feel about whether they deserved it or not, it was a pure pleasure to watch those guys and to cover 2 years of those guys in Boulder. And they are two of the greats. They're two of the best to come through Boulder. Travis Hunter, you could argue, is the best player to ever come through Colorado. He probably is,
Yeah.
because you can't compare eras.
Right.
I mean, Byron Whizzer White was the best all around player Colorado's ever had when you look at all three phases, because Travis didn't do special teams. So you have to give the nod to Whizzer White because he did everything.
Hmm.
But Travis, it's like, to me, it's Whizzer White and Travis. Those are the two best versatile all around players CU's ever had. I know Shedeur, people could argue that, but it was a cool honor for both of them.
It was. Yes. And look, all right, we got a bunch to talk about just at a let's just simplify everything. Nobody was
Yeah,
upset Travis's number went up there. Nobody was. You and I brought
yeah,
this topic up back in November after the Oklahoma State game about jersey retirement. I think we were the first ones to talk about it publicly. You and I both agreed Travis Hunter has to go up.
yeah,
We didn't expect it to be right away, but I have no problem with it being right away. In fact, if their announcement had only been about Travis, you wouldn't have heard anything from the alums.
right,
Maybe one, but because Shedeur is in there, certainly his name, and I think what's interesting is you have two different factions. You have the national people who bring up, his record against top 25 teams, never making a bowl game, didn't win a conference. That is separate. If you're not a CU fan or you don't live in the state of Colorado, your opinion to me on this topic in particular, it really doesn't hold any weight. I don't
right.
care what you think, if I'm being
Yeah,
honest with you, because so many people just a couple of years ago had absolutely no idea what the state of this program was in. So I just
right.
I throw all of the national stuff out, like
Well,
anything you heard on the national
yes,
shows, and any of these random talking heads or chatter, if they're
yeah,
not a Buffs fan or they don't live in Colorado, to be honest, in this conversation, their opinion doesn't hold weight to me.
yeah. To me, it'd be the same as if you and I chimed in on who Tennessee was
Sure.
deciding to honor. Like,
Absolutely.
I don't know their
100%.
program. Why does my opinion matter? So none of their opinions matter on that, in my opinion. But what does matter to me is the alums and kind
Yeah.
of what they say. And I agree with you that had the announcement been we're going to retire Travis's jersey and we're going to honor Shedeur as one of the honored jerseys on the west side, like 28 other players have had. I don't think people would have had a problem with it because, and we'll get into this, but CU has a criteria for the honored jerseys that are on that west side, and Shedeur met it.
So
So
explain the difference, because
yeah,
the east side of the stadium, where everybody saw that the 2 and the 12 now are for
yeah,
retired jerseys.
yes,
And in Colorado's history, they have only ever retired 4 numbers:
yeah,
Rashawn Salam, Whizzer White, Joe Romig, and what's the
Bobby
fourth?
Anderson.
And Bobby Anderson. Thank you.
Yep, yeah,
Those are the only 4 prior to this previous week. On the other side of the stadium, where the press box is and
hmm,
where the broadcast booth and where the coaches sit, there are a bunch of different names, a bunch of them. And if you go and look at Folsom Field, Google Images, you'll see those names up there on the
yeah,
west side of the stadium.
and
So
it's
I just want to be
yes,
clear for people out there. There are 2 different categories which CU has honored players in the past.
yes, and so. And if you ever gone to a game or you go this fall, just look on that west side where the press box is, and you'll see all those names in yellow. And it's a Ralphie logo with their jersey number and then the name. And it'd be 94 Alfred Williams, things like that. So
Dion figures. There's plenty of guys
yes,
over there.
things like that. So that was where, last week a lot of the narrative was, you some of the newer fans are like, well, why didn't all these players get upset before? Well, it's because that wasn't the policy before. Like they were honoring all those past players. That they were doing a solid job of that, not a perfect job. We'll get into that here in a
Yeah,
second. But
definitely not.
they were honoring them. But so the retired numbers really they did, Whizzer White played in the 30s, and they retired his number in 1938. Joe Romig played in the early 60s, and he was the last great two-way player before Travis at CU. Offensive, defensive line, they retired him in 1963. And then Bobby Anderson, they retired him in 1970. He finished in 1969. So, real quick on the timing, all 3 of those they did right after they were done. So there's a precedent in doing it right after the players are done this following spring. Bobby Anderson, they did it spring ball, things like that. But since 1970, in 55 years, Matt, they've only retired one, and it was Rashawn Salam, and they did it less than a year after his death. And that's why they did it, is sort of a posthumous thing, sort of make up for some mistakes, frankly, from the past. I mean, they should have retired him a long time ago,
Long time
but that
ago.
was the only exception because he won the Heisman Trophy. Um, and a big reason was, and some background that people need to know is Bill McCartney was the head coach here for a long time. 1982. Now, from 1970 to the 80s, there wasn't a great period for the Buffs. There probably wasn't anybody worthy of a jersey retirement then. They
Right.
weren't very good. Bill McCartney comes in and revives the program. He did not believe in retiring numbers. He was very much a team guy. He didn't believe in that and didn't want to retire numbers of individuals, and also didn't want to take the numbers out of circulation. The people that came after him, Rick Neuheisel, Gary Barnett, felt the same way. They didn't want to retire numbers and take numbers out of circulation. So, in 1998, when Gary Barnett was the head coach, CU actually came up with a policy, and I'm looking at it right here. I was sent to me the other day that CU decided in '98 to no longer retire jerseys in any sport. So they came up with the idea we're going to do honor jerseys because coaches didn't want to take them out of circulation. So they came up with a criteria for honor jerseys, and those are the 28 names that we see on the west side, right? And so I was telling you before we started this, there's specific criteria for honor jerseys. And I don't need to go through the whole thing, but like basically, if you win in foot, we're all going to go through football. If you win a national award,
Mhm.
so if you win the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award, you're automatically get an honor jersey. Well, Shedeur won that. If you win the Bolitnikoff, if you win the Heisman, things like that. If you're a unanimous All American,
Mm.
I think the only one since 1970 is Travis. Or if you're a two-time All-American, recognized by at least one of the five major um, two-time first-team All-American. The other one would be All-Conference if you're three-time All-Conference selection, including at least once first team, or if you're twice unanimous first team, or if you were a Conference Player of the Year.
Right.
So when you look at that, I mean, Shedeur, I mean, Travis met every
All
one
of
of those,
that.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Shedeur, I mean, he won the national award. He was a Conference Player of the Year. So Shedeur,
Slam dunk
they're
for
both
an honored
slam dunk.
jersey.
And
Yeah.
so I honestly think if the announcement was, we're going to retire Travis and Shedeur is going to be an honored jersey, I don't think people would have had a problem with it. I think it's more lifting Shedeur above some of those other greats that people had a problem with, and we can debate that, you know, back and forth, and people will disagree, agree, whatever. But I think that's where the problem was, is that they lifted Shedeur above some of those other guys. And, everybody brings up the names, and you could argue whether he's even the best number two to ever play at Colorado, because Dion Figures just 4 months ago was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame and was a Thorpe Award winner and All-American, things like that. And um, so yeah, that's the distinction between the two sides. Sorry to get long-winded there, but
No, no, no. I think it's important that we outline that stuff. And again, to those of you who are already triggered by this topic, Brian and I haven't offered an opinion yet. So if you're mad at us already, you might want to check yourself. Um, Look, when we talked about this topic back in November, you and I were even split on Shedeur, right? I said, hey, look, I posted the clip the other day. I was like, hey, look, I mean, Shedeur probably deserves it, considering all of his school records and what he's done. And we all know that Travis doesn't win the Heisman without him. I mean, that's a fact, okay?
yeah.
So I do believe that he should have had his number retired. However, it's all about in circulation. There's so many players in college football, and there's guys who wear the same numbers on both sides of the football. That's kind of, I would imagine, part of what CU's reasoning is it's like you don't want to take any of that away because we got like 100 kids
Right.
out here, So I get it. I would have put it up there. But I would have also put a few other names next to it, right? Just because, not because of Shedeur, but because of everyone else. And when we talk about the past in this program, Colorado has been, DOA, dead on arrival, for the better part of the last 2 decades. Okay.
Yeah.
But prior to that, this is a university that has a rich football tradition, and there were many, many talented, not just college guys, but guys who went on to have very successful careers in
Yep.
the NFL that
Mhm.
came out of this university. And as a result, some of those guys were honored, but some of those guys deserve to be on the other side as well.
Yeah.
Like, there's no doubt in my mind that needs to happen. So
Yeah.
here's where I think CU messed up. Okay, they announced this way too late. A couple of days before the spring game was embarrassing. That was a complete misstep. Number
Yeah.
one. Number two, in announcing this, they also should have had at least some foresight, if in fact this was well in the works ahead of time, to say, okay, we're going to do these two, but we also have a rollout coming this season with guys who are retired who can come in and be honored. And here are the names that we're gonna do this season and move on. And I think people would have been like, oh, that's really cool. They're gonna honor the past, and it's not just about these two.
Yeah.
However, you're going to get some of that other stuff. The problem is to your point, by doing it the way they did it without having acknowledged some of these other guys that deserve to be on the other side. And you want to talk about that criteria real quick? Because I think that's important to bring up too.
Yeah. I went through some of that stuff with that criteria as far as the conference player of the year and things like that. It's interesting that, you know, there's several guys that won conference player of the year honors as a Buff that they're not up there for some reason. And I don't understand,
Right.
why they're not up there. That's what you're talking about, right? Is
Absolutely.
going through some of that. And so it's interesting that, there's only, the list is fairly short. But I think it's 11 or 12 guys have won Conference Player of the Year, and six of them aren't even up there. And one of them is Jarek Broussard, the running back in
Right.
2020, was a Pac-12 Player of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year. And from what I was told, once he transferred out, he left CU and went to Michigan State. Once you transfer out, you disqualify yourself from that, and I understand that.
And he was
And
wearing Phil Lindsay's number anyway. So
but and I know he had a great year, but it also came in a 5 game
yeah.
pandemic shortened season, and so I'm fine with that one. But
Yes, me too.
the receiver Charles Johnson was the Big Eight Offensive Player of the Year in 1993. His name is not up on the honor jersey. That was an automatic qualification based on what I'm seeing in 98. 2002, Chris Brown, Offensive Player of the Year in the Big 12, running back.
Stud,
He's not up
stud.
there. He's not up there. Two defensive players of the year in the Big Eight from the 1960s: William Harris in 65, Bill Brundage in 69. Their names and numbers are not up there on our jerseys. They're automatic qualifiers. And then Jordan Dizon, linebacker 2007, was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year and is not up there. And then another one, I mean, you and I were talking about one of the criteria is if you're three-time all-conference, including at least once first team. Nate Landman, just a few years ago, was twice first team Pac 12 and once second team Pac 12. That's an automatic criteria. So there's at least six guys that deserve to have their name on that west side. Now the list is getting pretty long, and maybe you got to tweak that criteria. But the criteria that's laid out there, those guys should be up there.
I don't think the criteria needs to be tweaked. I think they just need to correct it and put those names up there, right? Like,
and there might be more. I don't know if you go back through history, but
sure, absolutely. And I think the point is that look, CU has not done this well, okay,
no.
In their history, and the rollout was rushed, and I don't know. The way it came off because they did it late after the numbers of ticket sales came out made it look on the surface like it was an attempt to get more butts in seats, which I just think is a bit of a cheap trick to play with their number retirements. And if it wasn't, then why did you roll that out a couple days before the game? It didn't make sense. It wasn't good planning. And then, to be fair, I I have tons of respect for Rick George, but I think Rick George put Coach Prime in a very awkward situation by making him the one that had to address it. Coach Prime has no frame of reference of history of this program. How many more times do we have to prove it? Now, I think that he's done a really good job in his own way of going to learn about some of those things that maybe still matter to him, right? Maybe some of the other tradition stuff he's not all that concerned with, but he's made an effort. And it was not fair of Rick George to put him out there as the face of that because it's an athletic department decision. And to not even come around for an availability, I thought was kind of I just didn't like the move. I didn't like the move by CU. I thought it was sloppy. And again, it wasn't anything because of Shedeur and Travis or Coach Prime. It really didn't have anything to do with all three of those guys.
Right.
The problem was the university put him in a bad position, and they've got to own that. Look, not everybody bats 1,000. Okay, I make plenty of mistakes in my life too. This was a mistake, and it wasn't a mistake to retire them. It was a mistake based upon, at least in my opinion, how they went about it. And so I think to wrap this up, look, the reason why I throw everybody else's opinion out who isn't a Colorado fan or, is just a national talking head is because they don't know what the depths of this program were just a few years ago.
Right.
This program does not turn around without Shedeur. That counts for something, okay? Yeah. It does. And if all you want to look at is record, that's fine. But I got news for you. Those guys that we mentioned, the Hagans, the Stewarts, they played on infinitely better teams than Shedeur with some serious talent around them that were competing at the top of their conference or for a national title year in and year out. Yeah. Shedeur lifted this team up there, and the only reason they get to 9 wins is because of him. So for me, I consider that having met the criteria. And the truth is when we talk about criteria, CU makes the criteria. Okay. So it can be adjusted. It absolutely can.
Well, and it was because their criteria since 98 is we don't retire jerseys.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, it's up to their discretion. And so they did. And there's a lot of bad looks, Matt. And look, I agree with you. I don't put it on Coach Prime
at all,
or Travis, because there's a lot of good people and up at CU, but they've fumbled this type of thing for years. You know, Coach Prime is absolutely right. When after the game, I asked him the question about Bill McCartney. They announced the statue for Bill McCartney. I just wanted to get his thoughts on that, and he took that time to really kind of rip the athletic department for why is it taking so long to do this stuff. And I said, well, I wasn't firing back at him, but I was like, at least the statue has been 2 years in the making. And he was like, what do you mean in the making? And I totally agree with him.
Right? Yeah.
Totally agree with him. I mean, Bill McCartney was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2016. If the statue had not, that was already what, 20 some years after he retired. So at that point, even let's get this statue going, and they could have done this statue 5, 6 years ago while he was still here and in solid health at that time. I mean, he was still um, pretty active and things like that up until the last couple of years. And so the way they handled the Rashawn Salam thing,
Ugh,
it was
that was
just,
awful.
you
That was
know,
really bad.
I know
He
you
was a
decided,
Heisman winner. I
I
mean, the
know,
fact that that
yes,
wasn't done ahead of time it's so embarrassing, honestly.
yes. I know you decided not to retire jerseys, but for a Heisman winner, make an
It's a
exception.
joke.
I mean,
Yes,
come on. And the funny thing is, Matt, is they decided in 98 we're no longer going to retire jerseys. That was 4 years after the Heisman.
I know.
You should have already done it,
I know.
And so they fumbled this in the past. They fumbled this all the time, in my opinion. And my
And
stance on the jersey retirement, by the way, is I don't think Shedeur should have been retired. But my reasoning is I'm not a huge fan of retiring numbers anyway. I love the honor jersey thing. And in my opinion, I think there's three jerseys that should never be worn in CU history again. And it's Byron Whizzer White, who didn't
24.
win the Heisman, but the Heisman was his senior year. The Heisman was like in its second year, and it basically went to
We hadn't
any
fought World War II yet. It's
right.
okay. Yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah.
but it basically, if you look at history back then, it went to the best player on the East Coast or on the East,
Right.
out in the East. But he was better than whoever won the Heisman the year. I can't even remember who it was. But his number, Rashawn Salam 19 and Travis Hunter 12. I think to me going forward, the criteria for retiring your jersey should be if you win the Heisman Trophy. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
and
Oh, you think that's it?
that's it. And
I don't
then
know if I'm going to co-sign that one,
because
but I
football, I
understand.
mean, there's only so many numbers, and if you start adding numbers to the retired jersey thing, how many numbers? Calling it retired jersey to me is dumb
Okay.
um because look, now you have six retired jerseys, right?
Yeah.
Three of them in the last year they've brought out of circulation and they're now being worn. And so
Yeah.
actually 11 is not. Bobby Anderson's 11 was being worn by Taufik Bayard until
Right.
Savion Riley went in the portal. Now he's number 9. But last year Preston Hodge wore 24. He was the first player since Byron Whizzer White in 1937 to wear 24. Um,
I was
60s,
surprised they just said no for 2, only because 2 is such a popular number. And when you go back through CU history, there have been some really good players that have worn number
really
2.
good number 2s. Yeah.
So that's the only thing. And when I say retired, I get what you're saying. Like untouchable, nobody wears them again. You got to win a Heisman Trophy. I actually agree with you there. But as far as like retiring it and putting it back into circulation, I don't really have a problem with that. I don't like.
I don't
I
really
like how they
either.
do the patches.
Yeah.
I do, and I respect Whizzer White. But gosh, Brian, that's almost 100 years ago. So I also get like putting it back into circulation. It's a popular number. So
Yeah.
to your point,
I
and
know, it's just funny.
we
Like
can wrap it up.
retiring jerseys I mean, it's supposed to be, it's never worn again,
Right. No, you're
and
100%
so
correct.
that's what it means. And so, um,
I'm fine with never having those worn again.
but
I really
I
am.
will say I did love the fact that, when Preston Hodge is wearing 24, there's a Byron was a white patch because when he makes a play, you, people see the 24 and maybe it's a talking point on TV or something like that. I like that. And so, I will say this: we know that 2 and 12 were not going to be worn while Coach Prime's the coach anyway. So
Right.
they were essentially already going to be retired under this coaching staff anyway. But yeah. Anyway,
I would just say congratulations to those 2 young men. So deserved, honestly, to get
yeah,
their day. Again, I know logistically it's easier to do it in the spring and there's precedent for it. I would have loved to see a full house there. And if you give a little bit more time to have had passed, only I'm talking like mid-season, there would have been a much bigger reception for it because I'll tell you, we're gonna make it a couple games and you're gonna miss number 2 and number 12.
yeah,
I just no matter what. So it would have maybe had a little bit more emotion behind it. Either way, they're up there. They're cemented in history and they deserve to be, and they're in a rightful spot on the facade.
yeah. And like I said, regardless of how I feel about retired jerseys, and I said that there's a three I feel like should be. Regardless of that, both of those deserve to be honored as great buffs, and it was great to see that happen for them because they are great buffs, and their impact on the program is significant, and yeah, so
I
I
got
thought that was deserved.
I got one more thing to say. For the fans out there that have been attacking the alumni, stop.
Yeah,
Nobody is hating. And, I I think maybe in a couple of occasions, I think I saw Bakhtiari being super critical of it. And look, I roll my eyes. He's got some thoughts in general that I roll my eyes at if I'm just being perfectly candid with you. But that being said, don't disrespect the history of the program either, because that's a bad look too. The last
Right.
thing anybody's trying to do is divide this program whatsoever. Everyone who is here, including players who were critical of the way that this was announced, first of all, they're justified in being critical of it. Second of all, those players helped lay the path and kind of put this program in prominence before, and certainly Travis and Shedeur are entering their era of having done that as well.
Yeah.
So I didn't like seeing a lot of the newer CU fans going at some of those guys, because a lot of those guys mean a lot to a whole lot of people around
Yeah.
here. So that would be all I have to say again. And I have never heard, I think there's a lot of projection and a lot of just unfair statements being made. I have never heard not one person who's upset that this has happened to CU. Everyone is over the moon, including those players who were critical of this, and again had every right to be based upon how it was handled.
Yeah. And I agree with you as far as the alumni. And, I kind of, I've always had this thought that like, you know, this is in general in life, but like if you say something and it insults somebody, if somebody gets insulted by what you say, and in your mind it's like that wasn't that bad, come on. But I've always been the belief like, well, but if it hurts them, you need to
Mm.
be sensitive to that,
Well,
right?
I respect that. I maybe don't feel the same way because
But
you're nicer than me.
but if you, I mean, what I'm married, and so
I
sometimes
know, I
it's
know.
like, if I do something that insults my wife, and I'm like, that's not that big of a deal,
Well,
but I'm sensitive to it. I'm like, all right, but
yeah.
that
You want to
is,
sleep in the bed that night. I mean, Jesus.
but my point is like, you have to sometimes say, you know what, I need to look at that point, look at her point of view, and say
Yeah.
that hurts her or
Sure.
whoever it is you're offending, and be careful with that. I think it's the same thing with this alumni here. Is that, you know, look, there's many of them that are hurt by it, and so you have to respect that opinion and say, you know what, if they're hurt by it, there's a reason for that. And I will say it's amazing, Matt, that here CU's intent was to honor these guys and do this, and the way they did it, they managed to tick off their alumni
Yeah.
and actually
Impressive.
damage Shedeur in the eye. I mean, I've seen Buff fans that have tried to minimize what Shedeur did, and say he shouldn't have this. And so
This is all
in
ridiculous.
trying to honor Shedeur, you've actually um, damaged his reputation in the eyes, I think, of some Buff fans, and you've managed to tick off your alums. So good job.
It's a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
It's an absolute two-way street. And so, I get where everybody's coming from, but I think it was important that you and I address this, because it should have never gotten the way that it got. And had they handled it better, it never would have. So
Yeah.
again, that's on them. And to be fair, all those names that we brought up are the guys that are deserving of being honored. Here's a task for the athletic department over the summer. Have an intern do some research, figure
Honor him.
out, honor them,
Yeah.
honor them. Like, let's stop
Let me
being
say this, Matt.
lazy about it. Yeah, it drives
Don't
me
do an
nuts.
intern. Just
Yeah,
form a freaking committee finally.
sure.
Like every other, Hall of Fame or whatever has a
Sounds
committee.
good. Do they
Come
not
up with
have
a
a committee?
No.
Is it just, oh, well, that's ridiculous.
They've never
They
had a
should,
committee. That's why they've never done it right, because they
hey,
don't
Rick,
do this stuff right.
Rick G, baby. It's time. It's time. And
Yeah.
honestly, there's a historian here I'm sharing the screen with that should be considered for part of it.
No.
So I just wanted to put your
It
name
needs
in.
no, but it needs to be Platty needs
You
to be
should
on
be.
it.
You
There's
should be.
there's well, I appreciate it, but I mean
You wrote a book about CU, buddy. I'm just saying, like, you are one of the most knowledgeable as far as Colorado historians go. Either way, it should be a collection of alumni, former administration members, and honestly, I would have zero problem if you were on that. You would
well,
treat that with respect.
I appreciate it. But I will say a lot of times on these things they do have media members that are on them, right? I mean, it is baseball writers that vote for Hall of Fame, right?
Yep.
It's things like that. So it shouldn't be all a media thing, but I think that
No.
that should be part of it. You should have some alums on there. You should have
Yep.
a Gary Barnett. Rick
Neil would
George
be-
could be on there. Neil would be
Yeah.
great on there. BG
Yeah.
Brooks,
Yep.
Dave Platty. There's plenty of people that could be on there. That they should have a committee and have people come up with this, and not just
It doesn't
Well,
take much time
let's
either.
do it.
I mean, honestly.
look. Okay, we'll wrap this up. This is Monday of the spring, after the spring game, right? It was a week ago that today that was announced. 2 weeks ago, there were a lot of people in that department that had no idea they were going to retire the jerseys. So it was sort of a, I heard it was in the works for a while, but what I've heard was there were a lot of people that had no idea until Friday before it was announced. And so it does feel like it was a thrown together type of deal. And um,
Yep.
they did a nice job with the presentation, and they
Yep.
deserve the honor, but CU needs to come up with a committee and figure out how to do this right. And not just for football, do it for
Every
men's
sport.
basketball, women's basketball, every sport. I mean, because the way they're doing it's not
I
right.
got like 5 names for men's basketball I could pull off the top of my head.
Right.
This is layup stuff, right? Like this
Right.
is stuff that takes no effort
Right.
and shows you care. So
Right.
I would hope that by the end of the summer, for those of you who are listening that have a little say and influence, because we know you do, fix it.
And by the way, you could do a committee and wouldn't cost you anything.
Not a
You can get
dime.
people to do it for free.
Not a
So
dime.
you could just take care of it and do it right. And yeah, there you go. Let's move on. Um, because after the jersey retirement, and everything was the spring game, and we've been talking about jersey retirement for a while now. So let's get on the spring game. What'd you think? Did you have
You
a
and
bigger
I,
problem with the jersey retirement or the spring game?
spring game. Um, I you look, and this is just a little behind baseball. I told you, after we did the show last week, we knew that a lot of what we were saying wasn't going to be very popular among a lot of people because,
Yeah,
quite frankly, a lot of people don't like to hear that anything's not going to be roses
right.
around here. And I understand that. But what Brian and I always do is we keep it real with you no matter what. We're objective
Yeah,
about it and we'll share how we feel. And look, you are entitled to your own opinion out there, but certainly so are we. And
yeah,
so um, we said last week that what we have seen from well off and so far through spring ball was a little bit underwhelming and
right.
maybe indicative of a team that is probably going to be around 6 wins or a bowl team as currently constructed. Now we obviously notated at length that it's not going to stay the same. Look at what happened last year. We know they added players after the spring, and we gave all of those prerequisites, right, to like
Right.
giving that take. However, what I saw on Saturday and the comments that we heard from Coach Prime afterwards completely justified
Yep.
my take and how
Yep.
you and I both felt, right? You and I both felt, look, this is a team that maybe they actually might have a lower floor than I anticipated heading into spring ball.
Hmm.
Well, part of that, and I would say the majority of it, is because of personnel. It's not coaches, not what you're lacking here. It's personnel. You just don't have the pieces I think you're going to need to play the way you're going to want to play. And even
Not right
despite,
now.
not right
Not right
now,
now.
not
Yeah.
right now,
Hmm.
not right now. It doesn't
Doesn't
mean you
mean they
won't have
can't
them.
have them in a month. Yeah.
Doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
But what it means is that there's some work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And so, I told you, normally we like to get in the comments and interact with a lot of you guys, but I told you, I mean, after that, I had no interest in getting in there because I knew what people
Yeah.
were going to be upset about.
Right.
However, I really do hope that a lot of you CU fans understand where we're coming from now after listening to Coach Prime. His wish list was enormous
Right.
afterwards. And sure,
Yeah.
you want to upgrade, but
I added it up. It was 16 spots that he listed.
and I said this in my little stand up after the spring game. I was like, in a normal year, if those
Mhm.
were the positions you needed coming out of spring ball, you would be like, uh-oh. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
but now it's different. Now you do have the
Right.
transfer portal and an
Hmm.
opportunity to actually go fill in some of those holes in your roster. So what I think is they have a team that has a 6 win-ish range at the moment, and
Right.
they're not satisfied with that, and they want to go and continue to uphold the standard. So
Yep.
and the last thing I'll say, the one note I made at the end of the podcast last week is that if you were upset with anything Brian and I said, but you wanted us to uphold the championship standard, you weren't allowed to be mad. You're not
Right.
allowed to be mad.
Yeah.
Okay. And Coach Prime came out afterwards. Look, we told you he wasn't very happy with a lot of this. He's
Yeah.
not. He's
Yeah.
not. And there's a reason they're going out to fix a lot of this.
Yeah. And I asked him on Thursday. I
Right.
said, yeah, you got the answer I wanted on Saturday when I asked on Thursday. I said, "What are the areas you're targeting?" And he gave an answer. He said everything. He said kicking game we're good, but
Hmm.
then he mentioned offensive defense. There's a lot of stuff we need, and so this is where, and these are the messages that I think you and I are both seeing as we're watching Well Off too, and as we Well Off does a great job. They show us him talking to the team a lot of times, and you listen to the message that he's giving to the
Right.
team, and sometimes in the way he'll stop a practice and restart or things like that. It's like he's not real happy with this team right now. I mean, this is
Right.
not a team that that he loves right now. I don't think. I
Hmm.
think that there's clearly a lot of holes, um, and so that's where we base it off of. And then I was glad that you asked on Saturday, and he actually gave a detailed list of here's actually what we're looking for, and it's all the spots we talked about, right?
All of them.
And I think you and I talked about last week. He said you've got to get at least two running backs. What did he say
Minimum.
on Saturday?
Yeah.
You got to get two
Two.
running backs. We talked about
He said that
linebacker.
Thursday too, by the way.
Yeah, we talked about linebackers kind of a red flag. He goes, you got to get a couple linebackers.
Yep.
I we've talked about defensive line. We like pretty much, but I love that he mentioned I want to get I can't remember his phrasing, but an absolute dog, like a real
Right.
man, a defensive
Yeah.
line. You always need more defensive linemen.
Right.
Um, he talked very candidly, I thought, in answering you, and I think it was maybe part of another answer too, where he talked about the secondary. He goes, look, we think we're going to be really good stopping the run. So our guys better be really good at stopping the pass. And there's going to be some change there. He basically, in my mind, he told us, not in so many words, but he basically said, there's some corners on this team right now
Hmm.
that they need to hit the portal.
Yep.
And we got to upgrade at corner. And what happened within a couple hours of the spring game ending? They get a corner who commits,
Yeah.
you know,
Keon
and
Parks.
and then a safety on Sunday.
Yep.
So yes, we're listening to this stuff and like there's areas that they look at and say, we're not good enough here.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of areas where they're not good enough yet.
Yeah, absolutely, and so do they. Otherwise, he wouldn't have. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said that. And
Right.
I mentioned this on social media when I posted the clip, as did a lot of other people. But I just really respect his transparency in that moment because there's so
Yeah.
many coaches that would never talk like that, and that is something that is super helpful for us to be able to understand his thinking and to be able to convey the message of the team more clearly. Because you want a more informed media base to be able to more accurately give a representation of what's going on. And
Right.
by giving that information to us, which we would have found out anyway, right? He knows we're going to find out anyway in about a month, but that isn't something a lot of coaches would do. Some guys would be like, oh, we need a few pieces on defense, maybe the secondary, up front. They wouldn't have given us their wish list. And I just
Yeah.
really appreciate that about him because he doesn't, restrict himself to norms or what his peers might do. He's just real with you. So I do really respect that about him. That look, we may end up having disagreements, as does everybody, right, about ideology or a point here or a point there. But what I do respect about him is I never feel like he's actually lying. Like I
Yeah.
don't. There's so many coaches that I've talked to in person, face to face, and been like, "You're lying." You're It's
Right.
never with him.
Right.
And so I appreciate that. And that was a big moment of, I think, trust too. I don't think he would have said that to us year one.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. He might have. But this is why when I get asked all the time, as you probably do, by out of state media a lot of times, where they'll say, "Man, what's it like covering Coach Prime?" I'm like, I actually like it because he's actually one of the best. I think probably the best coach we've dealt with from a media standpoint. And
Oh,
people
definitely.
think he's a media bully, but he's not. I mean, I think there's other coaches that have been bigger bullies than he has. I mean, he has his moments. Like he'll use us to send a message to the national media that kind of ticks him off. But and there's some banter back and forth. But like as you and I think we were talking about before on this podcast. I don't know if it was on or before we started, but my exchange with him on the Bill McCartney statue, he was not arguing with me. He was just
No.
we were having a back and forth, and he's trying to why wasn't this done before? So
Yeah.
I love the candor, and he's honest with us, and this is why when you and I talk like last week, they're like, hey, there's all this stuff that they need. That's because that's what he's saying,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean he's told us this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and look, I remember I think it was Warren Sapp even when he talked to us in the spring. Even he at one point was like, he told his group, he's like, look, we don't have the best quarterback in America anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We got to be better,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
And Gunnar White said,
Yep.
look, we don't have the best quarterback in America anymore. The offensive line has got to step up. And so
Yep.
everybody in that building knows they're worse at quarterback. It doesn't mean they're not good,
Oh,
but they're worse at quarterback because you don't
yeah.
have Shedeur Sanders. And so there's other areas of the team that have got to step it up. and
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
that's what our point is. And I think the other message, I guess, people that listen to this is like, we're not criticizing because we hate the Buffs. We're criticizing because we're analysts, and this is what we're seeing. And I promise everybody out there, Matt and I would much rather cover 9-4 than 4-8.
I mean, come on,
I mean, I
like
mean
come on. I
to
mean, that's
to
that's so
think
foolish.
to think that we're saying this because we want them to fail, is
He's
asinine.
covered so many bad
Yeah,
football teams,
yeah,
but at the very same time, look, there is there's a transition period here.
yeah,
And I think everybody is very aware of it. Now, as far
mhm,
as on the field, part of it came to be on the field because we can't watch practice, right? And
yeah,
so watching Salter and Lewis, even if it was limited, they're going to be playing a different style. Whereas maybe they actually did run the
mhm,
RPO stuff with Shedeur, but Shedeur didn't care really about faking the run ever.
yeah,
And if he did, it was kind of half-assed. It's
yeah,
one of the things that he's actually going to have to work on at the next level is selling run fakes. That's going to be
yeah,
critical for him.
right,
But they're going to do it this year. And if you're
yeah,
going to lean into that, you are playing a different way. You're not like they're going to have to run the ball more this year because obviously they finished the last 2 years the worst rushing team in the country consecutively, but
yeah,
they're going to have to do it more out of necessity because they're going to need it to move the ball this
yeah,
year. They're just not as dynamic as they were. And watching that, knowing there are a bunch of players out, the one thing I will say is that I come away being encouraged that there's a little bit more upside because I think they should have one of the better defenses in the conference. If everybody stays healthy and they are able to get some of those things on his wish list, I do think they're going to have one of the better defenses in the conference. But what does that mean?
yeah.
Right? Like, what is the average point total that a Big 12 defense is holding a team to? 27, 30? If you're going to, even with a good defense,
Yeah.
bad defenses get blown out, but even with a good defense, you're probably
Right.
not going to hold opponents under 25 points a game. What was their number last year? When it like
Actually,
24? It
I'll
was
look it
right
up.
around there.
I'll look it up while
Anyway,
we're talking. But I think it was it less than that? It might have gone up because of the bowl game. They allowed.
well, it was like 21 for a little while, wasn't it? And then it
Hold
went
on,
up.
hold on. I hit the wrong thing here.
Anyway, the point was is that okay, so you've got that, but look at all their
20.
losses.
They actually finished 23.1,
23.1. So
and
that's pretty
they
close
were
to 25.
sixth. They were sixth in the conference. So,
And they were sixth in the conference.
so yeah. So half the conference actually
If you
gave
got
up
what?
24.6 or less. So,
Didn't I say
um,
25 originally?
yeah.
Yeah.
But so I guess if you're one of the top defenses in the conference,
Yeah.
um, top five last year was 22.9. They were six, 23.1. So
Okay.
that 23, you've got to give up. I think you 23.1 last year. I think you've got to give up less than that.
And do you know how teams get there? Go look at each one of those teams. Will you just do me a favor? Read
Yeah.
me the top 3 or 4 teams, scoring defense average wise.
You're trying to say that they run the ball.
Give me those
I know
teams.
where you're going.
Who are those teams?
BYU,
Yep.
Utah,
Yep.
Arizona State,
Mm-hmm.
Houston,
Mm-hmm.
Iowa
That's
State.
all they could do last year. And Iowa State. Yeah. I mean, look at the backs that those teams have.
Yeah.
Okay. And even Rocco Becht in Iowa State, there was a lot of play action in that offense, and they did run the ball a lot.
Yeah.
So look, maybe it wasn't the Giddens and the Brooks, but what you have there are teams. Would you have Micah Bernard? Who are the other teams you said? I'm just trying to think off the top of my head.
BYU, who had a pretty good, they had a
Yeah,
solid rushing attack.
yeah.
Utah, Arizona State, Houston, and Iowa State.
Well, what BYU did, they had a very solid rushing attack. It was all play action based too. With was it Rosenblatt or whatever the kid's name is back there, right? Rowan Gardner.
I can't
Gardnoser.
remember.
Either way,
BYU actually, yeah, yards per game.
possession offense is very important, is what I'm trying
Yeah,
to say. Okay, and yeah,
and Utah's maybe last year's Utah was sort of the exception because Utah just stunk on offense, but they were just salty on. They're always salty on defense, but
but Micah Bernard still had a pretty good year, didn't he?
yeah, he was solid.
Yeah.
BYU, Iowa State, they didn't have their numbers as far as like yards per carry were not fantastic, but they ran the ball effectively. I think
My point
is your
is
point.
this.
They were all effective running teams, right?
My point is this: you have to have both things that work, right?
Yeah,
And if you want to win defensively, it is about possession. So running the ball does become very important. And I just
yeah.
think that when we're looking at what we saw with the RPO, how many targets went to backs and tight ends?
Last year,
No, on Saturday,
oh, a lot. I mean,
like 75%, if not more.
yeah, I don't know the number here, but like the tight ends, one, two, three. The tight ends had five.
Okay.
of the 14 receptions in the scrimmage portion.
Okay. And backs?
So let's see. Hayden had one, 34. Who's 34?
The walk on.
Batista.
Yeah.
He had one. 48 had one.
We're at 8.
So yeah, so 8 of the 14 went to tight ends and
Right.
running backs
And so
as far as the catches.
right. And a lot of that RPO stuff, that's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Like a lot of that stuff is actually supposed to happen if you're running a real RPO system with an RPO quarterback. They ran an RPO system last 2 years without an RPO quarterback. That's just not who
Yeah.
really Shedeur is, but that
Yeah.
was the system that they ran.
Yeah.
And so now with that, they have no resources allocated to those positions, backs and tight ends.
Yeah.
So I'm watching this and I'm going, okay, like there's a disconnect a little bit in ideology. And this summer, one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, is to figure out how to build a creative RPO offense. And
Right.
you are going to need tight ends to be able to do that. If not tight ends, a fullback, halfback, a guy who can get
Yep.
in the backfield, split out wide, a guy you can give a carry to, a guy you can throw a pass to, or like a Casey from Kansas, who they were moving all around the field, and he's sticking his nose in there in blocks and getting out on the edge. They're going to need that stuff to be successful.
Yeah.
And the one thing that Coach Prime pushed back on me about was I said, what were your takeaways of this new version of your team? And he was like, it's not a new version. We're going to do things the same.
Yeah.
Respectfully, I think we're arguing semantics. There's like 13 to 14 new starters, didn't we figure out, or at least
Yeah.
projected
It's a
to be?
lot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
including quarterback. It is a new version, and you are going to have to do things a different way. If the plan is to do things the same way, it's going to break down because it broke down last year. They
Mhm.
got 2/3 of the way through the season and stopped adjusting. They got solved. They
Yeah.
got solved at the end of the year and lost to every good team that they played. They beat the tar out of Utah and Oklahoma State, but those two teams were, they had nobody playing. They
Right.
were so injured. That was just like a glorified exhibition. So,
Yeah.
end of the year, I think it's important to learn, like, it's just not all going to roll over. And unless they change their approach in a couple of things, I think they could run into potential problems. And so, look, it's all going to be different. And I think the failure here would be thinking that it's going to be the same, which is where I guess I would disagree with his ideology and philosophy there. But again, he's the Hall of Famer and I'm not.
Yeah.
So I would just say we're going to have to wait to find out what happens. It's not about the creativity and the plays that they ran. It's about what they even have the ability to run. And are you,
Mhm.
based upon what he said, we have to find a way to maximize the strengths of our quarterbacks. Did he not afterwards?
Yeah.
Well, one of the ways to do that is to kind of feed into what they do well and,
Right.
and to figure those things out. And if utilizing the middle of the field and taking the checkdowns is going to be a big part of this offense, they have to allocate some resources there. And as of now, they've allocated next to nothing there. So
Yeah.
that scares me a little bit.
Well, yeah, and to your point, to those two positions, running back and tight end, as of us doing this right now Monday afternoon, they have not added a single running back this offseason. In fact, they lost their leading rusher, and they've added one tight end through the portal
Mm-hmm.
who looks solid, Zach Atkins,
Yeah.
and a couple of freshman tight ends.
Yep.
That's what they've added to those positions. And um, Pat Shermer told us, I think it was last week, he said, "Look, I want tight ends that can catch first and then block. I think Zach Atkins is probably that, but you want one more, maybe
At
two,
least two.
but I don't want
Two.
to. I don't want a freshman.
No.
I go get a senior,
Yes.
someone that I would love to see them grab a tight end that's got 30, 40 career catches already. Someone that's done it. Um, I I love the fact that you and I were texting about this, and we can disagree or whatever about this guy, but Javian Thomas, who was Cal's leading rusher last year,
Yeah.
I love that he's coming in, and I hope they
Yeah.
get him. I think I like him better than Isaiah Augustive, honestly, and so I think that'd be a great addition. But have to have two running backs, and but I almost think tight ends a bigger priority, should be a bigger priority than running back, and and I think they're equal probably,
Yeah, I would
but
say, yeah.
um, but I guess it'd be 1A, 1B for me. But tight end, yes, at least one more Zach Atkins type.
What I saw was two quarterbacks who were uncomfortable getting the ball outside the numbers, and maybe that
Mhm.
changes. They were uncomfortable getting the ball outside the numbers, and they were uncomfortable hitting the intermediate routes. And if you're going
Yeah.
to have to deal with guys like that, then you've got to build around them better. I mean, I respect the philosophy. If we feel like we have better receivers than tight ends, we want the receivers on the field. But what good does it do you to have four receivers on the field if your quarterback isn't accurate getting the ball outside the numbers or
Right.
hitting something 20 yards down the field? Now I think Juju showed us like a flash of being able to do that. Salter very much underwhelmed me as a passer in some of the things that I've seen from him
Yeah.
so far. Running is going to be a huge part of what they do, and so I think you need some graders.
And
You need some guys like that
yeah.
who can confuse a defense. The whole point and the way you maximize the RPO is if you're constantly keeping a defense on their heels. And the only
Yeah.
way to do that is to make a play look like one thing but pre-snap, but post-snap
Yeah.
make it look different.
Yeah.
And Kansas killed them. That was how Kansas killed them, by doing exactly that. That was how BYU killed them, by doing exactly that. That was how Kansas State killed them in the run game, by doing exactly that. You
Yeah.
got to have some of those guys. And I think it's nice to want to play 10 personnel all the time. Brian, they don't have tight ends to go 12, and
Right.
they're going to need them. Okay.
Yeah.
They're going to need them.
Mhm.
So that is something that was my biggest concern. It's like, okay, last year's model doesn't work for right now because you don't
Right.
have Shedeur. And this is something we talked about last year.
Mhm.
Shedeur covered up a lot, so much. And
Yes.
don't think for a second you get halfway in the year and don't recognize that either.
Well, Coach Prime said it.
Right.
He basically said it the other day, so he
Yeah.
recognizes it. And
Yeah.
this is where this is a whole other topic, the draft, but like this is where when people question Shador and his arm strength and things like that. I watched Saturday, and like you said, you're underwhelmed by Salter. I was underwhelmed by Juju as well, but
Yeah.
I think he's going to be great. But he's 17 years old right now and
Right.
should be a junior in high school, so I
100%.
think he can get there. But we're trying to compare Shador as a senior in college to Juju as a junior in high school.
It's unfair.
It's unfair. So
Yep.
this is where the throws. When I listen to people critique Shador for the draft, and I'm like, I remember the throws that he would make. I'm like, did anybody watch him?
I
Because
know.
the
I
throws were
know.
amazing and the pinpoint accuracy on a lot of those deep throws. And CU's best offensive play the other day in the spring game was those two quarterbacks heaving it deep, throwing short, and drawing a pass interference penalty. Those were the
Not
big
one
plays.
and not one deep ball was really
Not
accurate.
one hit. I mean,
Yeah.
there was two plays in the scrimmage portion, two passes that went beyond 10 yards. He
Right.
carried more than 10 yards. One was one to Cam Michael. It was across the middle,
Yep.
and it was one that um, well, he actually got in the end zone, but they called it down.
The one from
They should have
Juju?
been. Yeah, I think it was from Juju,
Yeah, the
and then
quick
there,
RPO. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then there was a 22-yard pass to the tight end Zach Atkins. So, as far as receivers, I mean, Joseph Williams, who's the big transfer get so far, had two catches, one for five, one for six,
And a drop.
and a drop. But like, I
Yeah.
liked him; he looked good. But I mean,
Sure.
they couldn't get him the ball. It was 5 and 6 yards. Quincy or is it Quincy Gibson?
Quentin Gibson. Yeah.
Quentin Gibson, 6 yards, 4 yards.
Yeah. No, it
So
was unimpressive. And it was
Isaiah
unimpressive.
Harge, who I love, I think he's gonna be great. One catch, 10 yards. So
Yeah.
they're not getting him to that. I mean, their best play, and I know it's vanilla and everything. The quarterback should look good in that setting when you can't get hit.
Especially when like half the defense is out too. I mean,
Yeah,
come on.
yeah,
They have like what, five starters at least already on the roster they
yeah.
were missing from spring?
And in a total of 24 passes thrown, CU put out stats that include 7-on-7, which is dumb. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't care about the 7-on-7
no,
stats.
no.
Between those two quarterbacks in the scrimmage portion, 24 passes thrown, and they gained 89 yards.
It's a concern for me. I'll just be
Yeah,
candid with you. It is
yeah,
definitely a concern. And for those of you who are like, oh, don't overreact to a spring game, I was worried I was doing that. So what did I do? I went on my phone and I watched the videos that I took. I filmed. I'll give you, here's two little things. I watched every little video that I filmed the last 2 years of Shedeur and Travis, okay? I filmed every snap from every game that I was at, including spring games, with my phone the last 2 years in case there
yeah,
was something incredible that happened, okay, that I could, use that video and post, right? And because I'd have a unique perspective with wherever I was. I did that again the other day. There wasn't a single highlight that I could
Yeah.
post. And I went back and
Mhm.
I went through Shedeur. Yeah. Was Shedeur running vanilla stuff? Well,
Yeah.
if he was zipping that thing all over the field.
Right.
So don't like the whole don't overreact to spring. It's
A-
not what I'm overreacting to the exact stuff that happened.
And I think
It's
he threw
about the
for over 200
potential.
yards. I think he threw for over 200 yards last spring game,
Yeah. So
running
look,
vanilla stuff. So,
look, I they're gonna have to do things differently this year. That's
yeah.
the what I'm trying to say, and
Yeah.
they're not there yet. And I think what they realized is that they took the spring with a lot of new pieces with the coaching staff. Let's evaluate what we have on this roster and what we can plug and play and move forward with, right? If they do really have these NIL resources that we've been hearing about, they shouldn't have a problem landing some of these guys that are in the
Right.
portal. You don't want to over leverage yourself, but I mean, it's spring portal. You don't have this is not the cream of the crop, by the way. So
Right.
the guys that they're pulling out right now, like I saw Terrence Love was the number one safety in the portal, and I know he has a prior relationship with Coach Prime. He's got eight total tackles in
Yeah.
2 seasons.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just calibrate
These are
what
not
our
all conference guys.
that's all I'm trying to say
Yeah.
is like you're going to try and plug a lot of holes, the guys you need, with probably not the best options to do it. And
Right.
I think, unfortunately, because of all of the emotion and because of what came after the season, they probably didn't have 100% effort in the portal after the season. That's going to be my guess. And people, if you're watching, you can get mad at me for saying that, but there was so much that happened last year and it was so emotional, and the extension wasn't done yet, and all of those other resources weren't cleaned up yet. I don't know how they could be in a better position then than they are now. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the pool that they're going to have to pull from now is just not as deep as it would have been then.
Yeah.
So it is what it is, but
I'll,
they're going to have to go with a little bit of limited, options here.
I'll say this. I'll say this a different way than what you said it. I would disagree to say they didn't have 100% effort in the portal. I would think that they weren't
Focus.
able to get what they wanted to because of, like you said, I think the extension not being done um, made C a little less attractive because you don't know if Coach Prime is going to be there.
Yep.
And I think that there's also, I think there's something to be said for, you and I have talked about this. When the Broncos signed Peyton Manning, you had free agents that wanted to come play for Denver and play with Peyton Manning.
Yep.
I think the last couple of years you've had, let's just call it free agents. That's what it is. Free
Mm-hmm.
agents that want to come to Colorado and play with Shedeur Sanders. I mean, what did LeJohntay Wester say when we asked him, what made you want to come to Colorado? Well, I want to play with Shedeur.
Will
Right?
Shepard.
Will Shepard. Well, I want to play with Shedeur Sanders. Jordan Seaton, why'd you come here? Well, I want to block for Shedeur Sanders. So, there's that. And so you lose that, and that's a big chip that you have to draw in free agents. And
It was your
uh,
biggest.
it
It
was your
was your
biggest.
biggest.
And so you lose that, and also in December, like you said, you didn't have the contract done yet. And so there was question marks of whether, and look, even in early January, there's talking NFL, all this stuff. And so there's some question marks. So now all that's, you're settling in. You don't have the Shedeur chip, but at least Coach Prime, is going to be here. I think that they should be better at being able to get some guys this time around. And I'm with you. I think our point, Matt, is that I think this team in August is going to look better than what it looks right now.
Oh
It
yeah.
does not look great right now. I think there's a lot of concerns right now. Coach Prime would agree with us. He told us this the other day, and so therefore the fans should agree. If Coach Prime's saying it, there should be some concerns for the fans out there too that say. But I think there should also be some confidence that the staff's going to work on it and fix it.
Yeah.
I'll say this too about spring is, and why I don't overreact to spring too much is that I counted 21 guys that were out the other
Yeah.
day, and a lot of them are key guys. Preston Hodge didn't go through spring at all.
You
You
had like
know,
5 key defensive players, but more outside of that,
right,
there really, even though there were
right,
21 guys out, there really weren't that many who are going to be key
right.
contributors.
And there's also, Robert Livingston said to us last week, he said, I spent the first 6 practices of spring just learning my guys, figuring out what they can do. And then from there, you kind of put some things together. But then the last half of spring, you're putting things together and guys are injured and they're out. And so it's sort of a skeleton crew of what you can work with. And so uh, neither coordinator was able to even really work with their full complement, right? Even if they were all there, they're still learning them. I mean, I think Pat Shermer would say the same thing. Like there were still a lot of guys. He'd never worked with Juju and
No.
with Salter before March, whatever day they started spring ball,
Yeah.
and those receivers. He's never worked he knows Draylon, he knows Omarion, but he never worked with Joseph Williams. A lot of those linemen that are in there, they're new. And so there's a lot of new pieces that have to come together. That's why a lot of this doesn't look great right now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, coming out of spring, I'm a little bit concerned, but I also think uh, there's time. They're going to put it together, and I think I'm frankly excited to see what they can do in the portal because I think the portal season is going to be huge for them.
Oh, it has to be. They
It
don't have
has
a
to be.
choice. They don't
Yeah,
have a choice.
yeah,
And I think I would just say it's like, if you don't have a great quarterback, which they don't anymore, you have to have a pretty good system if you want to win a lot of games. And I don't think
yeah,
they have one either. That's
yeah,
that's what I really believe offensively. Defensively, I think is a different story. And
yeah,
that's where a couple days after spring ball, I'm like, okay, defensive line, I like what I see there. I think Anquin Barnes had a really nice day too. Again, you and I kind of keep beating the Anquin Barnes drum. I don't hear anybody else talking about him.
yeah.
He's having a really nice spring. He moves some dudes around in there. He's a starter. Like I don't think there's
Yeah.
anybody else they're going to bring in. Amari McNeil, I'm not exactly sure what his situation is. He's been so up and down in his career. The hope is that he enters a starter caliber player in
And
the
he
fall.
was one of the guys out on
Yep.
Saturday.
Yep. But outside of Hodge, Okunlola, Wade, which obviously these are big names, right? Hood,
Yeah,
which they will start. They weren't out there, and the
yeah,
offense still looked that way.
yeah,
So that should be like a shock to the system. And
yeah.
um, look, again, it's one spring practice. I'm sure there have been better ones, but I think people will hear this and some people will go, "Oh, you're overreacting too much." These are a compilation of thoughts I've had
Right.
watching all of Well Off, all of it, every minute of it, and this. Okay, so maybe there are things that are happening that we're not seeing, and I'm
But
very
it's
open to that as well.
yeah.
But
And
I just say, but you don't end up with the list from
yeah,
Coach Prime that you end up with if everything's hunky dory. You just
right.
don't.
Yeah.
So that told me a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing too, it is one practice, but it's the one.
Right.
And you
Yes.
knew you were on
Yes.
national TV. It's the
Yes.
one where you're performing in front of everybody. It is the one impression you get to make.
Mm-hmm.
And so
And it
yeah,
wasn't a great one.
I'm gonna put more on that than anything that happened in the other 14. The other 14 might have been better.
Yeah.
But when that one in front of 20,000 people and on ESPN2 looks like that, that's a concern too, because that means that when the lights come on, you didn't perform. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it was not a great spring game. I thought the defense did some nice things, and Tawfiq Byard, it looked really good to me. Kylan Salter, I thought looked solid. Arden Walker had a sack, and TJ Branch, I thought looked pretty solid on the back end. So there were some things I liked, but clearly it's a team, as we talked about last week. They've got to get better, and I think they will.
There's two other things I want to bring up with the quarterback situation. I found it very interesting that when I asked Jordan Seaton who the leaders of this team were, he did not mention Caden Salter. That's number one. And number two, apparently there was some disciplinary thing for Salter that resulted in him not getting, first team reps, which
Yeah,
that's not a good first impression for Coach Prime in the first month as a senior quarterback.
right.
Okay. I mean, I don't know what he did, and Coach Prime didn't want to air his business out. Now, it was our fault in the media for not asking them about that afterwards. We should have. That was a mistake. But I think after Coach Prime threw his wish list at us, all of our heads were spinning like, okay, like
Yeah,
trying to write all that down and think about what that meant. And then we spoke to the quarterbacks, but that's not a good sign either.
yeah,
Just being real with you. Like, this is your first month. Coach Prime is literally Mr. Discipline. Like,
yeah,
I hope it was being late or grades or something, because anything else would be a concern at this point. I mean, what else does
yeah.
Salter have to do? He doesn't have a full class load, does he?
Well,
Can't.
that's what's interesting is that usually guy gets first team reps like that, and when Juju came out first, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be Salter, whatever. But usually a coach will say, well, he earned it. He's been playing well, but it was no, that's a disciplinary thing, and so he never said Salter, but we can all assume that that's what it was. And so,
There wasn't any
yeah,
good. It's not like Juju got first team reps for good behavior.
right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Juju he's been missing class, so we decided to throw him to the wolves with the first team.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that disciplinary. So yeah, that is concern, and yeah, you would love to hear. And
He's a senior quarterback.
this is not to say he's not, but you're right. I never thought about it, but um, people have been asked about who's stepping up as leaders throughout the spring, and never once has a quarterback's name come up.
Not at all. And Salter's got over what, 21 starts? Doesn't he have 21 starts in his career? That's kind of
More than
crazy.
that, because he was 21 and 4, so that's 25 starts the last 2 years.
Anyway, so look, they're just some flags. It doesn't mean they're going to be
Yeah,
bad. You know, it's
yeah,
just like, hey, this is what we're noticing, and
yeah,
you know that's basically all I really had from the quarterback position. They got some work to do. They don't know what system they want to run, and those two guys need a bunch more reps with a lot of new wide receivers, and you know, certainly a bunch more reps in this new system that, quite frankly, they still don't know what it is yet. Like
right.
they say they
Yeah,
do, but it's going to take a dip. And here's what I'll say: you'll remember after the Nebraska game last year, we were all like, "Oh gosh!" Like, I remember sitting there in Omaha the Sunday after the game, or maybe it was the Monday after the game. I can't even remember. I had to stick around and do a radio show in Omaha, so
yeah,
we did our podcast remotely, and I remember. I said, look, if they don't run the ball against Colorado State, I don't know when they're ever going to try, if they're ever going to have any interest in doing it. So,
yeah,
look, just because you have an idea of how you want things to go entering a season, you know, whether or not it was just lip service from Coach Prime, didn't like what he thought I was implying. I don't know about saying it's a new version. It's definitely a new version, man. Like I
yeah,
don't know what else to say. I had a couple
yeah,
other media people reach out independently to me, like, what? No, if
yeah.
it's not, I'm worried.
Yeah.
I'm worried because it wasn't good enough last year, and they had a better team last year. So
Well,
I'm
yeah,
concerned.
it absolutely is a new version because you don't have the Heisman Trophy winner and you don't have Shedeur Sanders. So, and you don't
Anyway,
have half your starters on defense. But
I don't know why he
it
wanted to
is.
argue
But
that
the
with
other thing
me.
too is at some point for 2 years they've talked about needing to run the ball and wanting to run the ball, and at some point they've got to. And so we'll see. I'm interested to watch. What happens in the portal. It closes on Friday, so there's going to be some guys this week to go in it. Who knows? Maybe over the last hours we've been talking. The
Does it close
portals,
Friday?
yeah, it closes Friday.
Okay.
Um, and so maybe there's some people that have gone in as we're talking here, but the portal's going to be jumping over the next few weeks, and we'll be back on. We're going to do some shows and talk about it, and um, yeah, I think later on, maybe later this week, we'll do a draft preview.
Yeah, I think that would be a
But
good call. The last thing I'll say about the spring game, let's kicking real quick. I think let's end on a positive note. Damon Graves looks like he's got a leg.
yeah,
Greaves or Graves? I think it might be Greaves.
yeah,
He's got the new mate. He can boom it. I think he's got a better leg than Bassett does, if I'm just being honest with you. That first punt of
yeah,
his in a cold day was impressive. We talked about the field goal kicking situations with Mata and Buchanan. Coach Prime basically said up to 45,
yeah,
the other day, which was the first time he's actually given a yardage total on it.
yeah.
So
Paula
my,
kind of said that earlier this spring too.
he did,
Yeah,
but I thought that it was the first time the boss has said it. So I thought it
yes,
meant
it
maybe a
meant
little
more
bit
when the
more.
boss says it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Buchanan missed a couple left hash, the same exact spot. Was it from 50 or 53,
50.
those
It's
first two?
50.
Right.
Yeah,
Then he goes to the right side. He makes the one from 53, and then he drills it from 60, which was good to
yeah,
see. So
yeah,
they've got an option. They've got an option. And I
yeah,
will say, there was one little tear when on a cold day the opening kickoff went 3/4 deep into the back of the end zone. I said,
yeah,
"We we've done it, gentlemen. We've done
yeah,
it." So
yeah,
that part shouldn't be as big of a deal, which is important because if you're going to be relying on your defense to win games, which I think at least at this stage, I'm
yeah,
of that opinion that their defense is going to have to be excellent for them to win this season, which I think they're capable of doing.
yeah,
That it's important special teams is dialed in, which is another area that I think is improved. So
yeah,
I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that because, Michael Pollock, it was like, oh, really? He's already on staff. You're bringing him in. Well, early returns with some different personnel, I think are okay. Now, punt returner, wasn't it Farrakhan that muffed his very first attempt?
I don't remember.
I think it was. But outside of that, I just I'm I'm more pleased with their kicking situation, although I still think we're going to have some fourth and longs this year
I
that
will
they
say
end up.
I was mildly disappointed that Buchanan didn't put that ball through the end zone.
Oh, yeah, whatever.
Like, I mean,
It was
when,
freezing.
I know I'm joking, but
Oh, okay.
when the
Okay.
guy has like 95% touchbacks at sea level
That's
and he
right.
gets up here, I thought that would be through the uprights almost. And they told us this week, Coach Prime told us earlier this week that he was basically making field goals on kickoffs. He's putting them through the uprights. I think it was
That's right.
Coach Prime that said it. So I was mildly disappointed it didn't go through the end zone, but
He was like, he's going to kick it into the band. Isn't that what
because
he
it,
said?
it was technically returnable,
Yes.
so
It wouldn't have been, but it was.
I know. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know when you got there, but um, I don't think you wouldn't have been there yet, but I don't think so. But
Probably not.
very early, before fans even got in there,
No, I definitely
because
wasn't there then.
yeah, Graves was out there punting. Mark Vassett was actually with him, and like he was basically he was standing it. He wasn't long snapping, but he wasn't like getting down
I
between
love
his legs.
that.
But he was throwing the ball to him. And Graves, Adam and I were watching Graves punt a lot. His directional punting,
He's good. No, he's
there
good.
was a lot of punts. He was like, 50, 60 yards, and he is hitting it, 2 feet from the sidelines and bouncing it out at the four. Just like Mate. I mean, Mate was really good at that. New Mate does that really well also. So I'm looking forward to seeing. I think they're gonna have to punt maybe a little bit more than last year,
Yes.
and
Yes.
they're gonna need him as a weapon. I think he is a weapon.
Absolutely. And first of all, I love Mark. Mark Vassett is just such a great,
Yes.
great young man.
Yeah.
Not that young anymore, but great, great,
Yeah.
great guy. And I love, he hasn't left. He's still here, right? He's not going back to Australia, at least not yet. He's going to try and give
Yeah.
it a shot in the
Yeah.
NFL, I
Real
imagine.
quick on that, I ran into him last week maybe
Yeah.
and asked him about that, and he's obviously hoping he's not going to get drafted, but he's
No.
hoping to get in a camp. If he doesn't, he said he has to go back to Australia because
Of his
of the
visa.
visa.
Yeah, they're
So
probably
and so he'll
yeah.
have to go back and try again next year. So, um,
Why don't we
yeah,
leave it there? Why don't we leave it there?
yeah.
Okay.
So we'll see. I'm hoping for the best because he deserves at least a shot to get into somebody's
Or
mini
Coach
camp.
Prime could hire him as a punting specialist.
Yeah, yeah. Why not?
Why not? He's a great guy to have around. I'd
I
think
mean,
about it.
you
You
can
can have
have
as many
unlimited
coaches as you
staff,
want.
right? Yeah. I mean, just have him on. Yeah, have Mate work with the new Mate.
Why not?
Awesome, Matt. Let's come back later this week and talk about the draft.
All right, buddy.
Talk to you soon.